Hello everybody, my name is Heather R. Hitchman. I am an artist and world builder creating the paranormal fairy tale world of Terratoff. You can find out more about me and my work on patreon.com/Terratoff. Today I'm going to be doing a little tutorial and live demo showing how I draw scales. And I drew all of these little scales right here super fast. And how did I do that? Well, there is a secret and I'm going to show you how to do it. Let us begin. So first things first is drawing scales seems really scary and it can be really intimidating because, you know, how do you keep everything consistent? How do you make everything look believable? How do you draw the scales along the path? And how do you draw them quickly? Because let's say that you're drawing something like a little dragon. A little poofy smoke coming out of his nose. A little eyeball. Little horns. Let's just like draw like a really quick little baby dragon. A little quick sketch here. Alright, so you got your baby dragon and you got to fill this whole thing with scales. Well, how do you, that's so much space. How do you fill it all in super quickly? It will probably take forever. But if you learn this one simple trick, you can actually fill in a large space and follow along a path pretty quickly. So I'm going to show this really crude example right now of how I can fill this space with scales really quickly. And the great thing about this technique is you can use it to add texture and believability and details to all of your little scaly creatures that you want to create. You don't want any scales on the wings necessarily. But look at me go. Just scaling it up here. And again, this is a little bit faster than I might go, and I'm being a little bit sloppier than I might usually be, but for the purposes of this demo, even while being a little bit sloppy, from a distance, I feel like this reads pretty good. You're getting the sense of texture, of depth, that there's something going on. But look, we're filling in all of this area. And it didn't take me like a few minutes. It did that in what? 2 minutes? Magic. But it's not. There's a scientific theory, a proven scientific approach to this that'll help you draw scales super fast every single time. So step one, draw a scale. Then you draw the next scale. Now the next thing, draw one more scale. Here we go. We've got 3 little scales, and this is going to be the base of the formula. Once you have a set of scales, 2 or 3 at least, I like to start off with at least 3. I mean, usually you'll have like a big tail and you'll do a whole row. But for the purposes of this example, we're going to start with a row of 3. So you have 1, 2, 3, just like that. Okay. Then the next step is you want to draw the next row of scales, and you want to start in the center of the first scale and end in the center of the next one, just like that. And then you continue the pattern just like so, and you're going to reach over to the middle of the next one. Okay. So when you can master this, you can draw scales super quickly. Okay, these are a little sloppy, but that's okay, because you have to be okay with a little bit of sloppiness to do this technique. And the reason why is because if you obsess with drawing them perfectly every single time, it's going to slow you down. I mean, obviously we don't want to be like that. You want to get somewhere between this and this. That's the goal. All right, so this very simple technique is all you need to know. Once you have this down, what you need to do is practice drawing it over and over and over again. That's right, my friends. You are going to draw, you are going to fill your sketchbook with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these little rows of scales. And try doing them on different angles like that to kind of get used to drawing along a path. And once you've just like mastered this pattern, you can draw scales super, super fast, and you can fill a really big area with ease. So a couple tips for this technique. I've already said it once before. Don't try to be like too precious about it. it. Life and nature has variation, so it actually will look better if your scales are slightly off from one another, if they have little variations in them. When you're looking at them one by one, it might look terrible to see like, oh, this one's got a little bump here. But when you see it all like together, filling a space, it just kind of adds some authenticity to the texture and just kind of makes it have like that more kind of real natural feel to it. So don't be too wrapped up with trying to make everything perfectly aligned and not have any kind of like little bumps or bruises in it, because we want this to look like it's a real creature in real life, and real creatures in real life aren't robots. Not every single scale is perfect and pristine. They're going to have variations, so variation is actually good. And doing this over and over and over and over again will help you go faster. So at first you might, be a little slow, and that's okay. You're just getting used to it. You need to kind of train your hand to have... Let me talk a little bit about drawing along a path. So it's really easy. The first thing to master is drawing the scales in, a parallel row, like so. But the trickier thing would be doing something like this. Scaling along a path, such as this. Now, the reason why you need to learn this is because let's say you have a dragon and their tail is going like that. Got a nice little Welsh dragon tail with the little pokey bit at the end. Okay? If you just draw your scales in one direction, okay? Everything is fine at first because you picked a direction. And at first, the direction is going along with the tail, but very quickly we start to see, wait a minute, the scales are now going a different direction than the rest of the form. So now your scales aren't really... See, I'm instinctively trying to follow the path, and I'm like, no, Heather, we must do it wrong. So this is what it would look like if you just kept your scales going all in one direction. It looks a little off because nothing is following the curve of this tail. Instead, you have the scales all going this way, and they're going to be competing with each other. So once we have a curve, we need to figure out how to actually get the scales to follow along, because the texture will follow the form. So for example, it's the same kind of principle with any kind of rounded form in real life. There's an image on this cup, but the image is following along with the form of the cup. It's rounded, so the image appears rounded. Okay? So when you're drawing creatures and forms in your art, and you want them to look more realistic and have form and depth to them, you want your textures to follow along with the form of the creature you're drawing. We have our dragon tail, and we want to fill it with scales. Okay? So how is the curve going? We've got a curve going like this. So this is the curve that we want the scales to follow along. And all you got to do is, as you are drawing the scales, change the direction of how they're going. So we're going to start like this, following this more parallel direction, but almost immediately it's starting to curve up. So as I'm going, I'm kind of tilting the scales upward as I go. Going to focus a minute while I do that. And they can be a little tricky sometimes, but that's okay. Just take your time, think about it. All right, so now we're getting to that big curve. This is where things might get a little bit squashy. Things might not line up exactly the way that they were before, but that's okay because it's all just texture. It doesn't have to be exactly 100% perfect. See how I'm starting to have the direction go up now? And I've done that by just kind of gradually changing the direction of the scale. As I go. Now they're totally facing a different direction. Oh, this one's very sloppy though. Let's just kind of speed up a little bit. There we go. See, I was thinking too much. I was being too precious with it. And now I feel like it looks better. So here we go, around the mulberry bush, through the end of the tail, but out. Now the texture is following along with the creature. It makes more sense this way. Let's draw a mermaid tail this time. Here is a lovely mermaid tail. She's gorgeous, but she needs scales. Okay, let's fill this mermaid tail with some scales. Where is our curve going? It's going right along here. Just like so. This way. So you kind of want to visualize this curve, this line going through the form in your mind as you are drawing them. You can draw a line going through it if you like. A lot of fish actually do kind of have like this defined line that go through them, so that's not necessarily wrong if you want to have that in there too. So see, I'm making that turn right here, all of these scales, and as I'm doing that, it's kind of, as you can see, it's screwing up my pattern a little bit. I'm having to think on the fly and adjust as I go, because they're not gonna always go like right in the middle necessarily, like in the little demo I showed. So, you know, you have to make allowances and think on your feet. Art is a very physical sport after all. We all know this. And now the curve has kind of become more relaxed, so I'm a little bit more relaxed with my scales and my strokes. But they're gonna turn again soon. I can feel it. I just know that this tail is going to take another turn, so I'm already starting to kind of angle them a little bit more downward in anticipation of this curve here, just so they are prepared and I don't have to make like a really jagged turn later, because that looks weird. I'll show you an example of that in a minute or so. There you go. So now the transition has been nice and smooth as the tail has turned. And like you can see that at the top we've got scales facing this way. Towards the middle we've got scales facing more that way. And towards the bottom again we've got scales facing back that way where it started again. So you want to make sure that you're kind of fading as you go and gradually rotating the scales, because if you have to make a sharp turn and you don't do a transition, this is what it'll look like. Oh crap, my tail turned. Let's turn the scales now. That looks a little sloppy. Now sometimes your character might have their tail turn really quick like that. So in that case, yeah, you might want to do that and go ahead and have it turn really quickly like that. But that depends on how your form looks. If you can avoid it, I'd say go through and try to be gradual as if you can. Let's talk about variations. Your scales can have variation. They can have different shapes, sizes, tightness, and patterns. And depending on the style that you give your scales, that's going to kind of dictate how, like the story that you're telling about your character with the scales. So my typical basic scale, let me go with color for a little while, will just be solid color. So if I'm just trying to do something really basic, I might go with basic if the character itself is really complex and I just want to have something kind of simple. I'll just kind of color in every other scale or so. Maybe I'll use a different, slightly different color to make a little bit of visual interest. Like that. So this color is spruce and this color is hummingbird. So just like a very simple one like that is very good, and that's fine. Another thing you can do if you want to add some variation is to add like a little dip. So just like a little dip like that. It's really cute. Now these, you know, these take a little longer. So if you have time, and you want to give your character a little bit of extra visual interest, I like this pattern too, but it can be very time consuming. So another thing you can do is kind of mix and match. You can have regular scales, but also have a few that have this kind of dip to them. You can also kind of give your scales some little stripy stripes to make them a little bit more visually interesting and give some variety. So once you draw all your scales, go in and you add a couple little stripies like this to different areas, just to kind of add a little bit of extra texture. I find that this kind of thing works better when you have bigger scales so that you can kind of fill the space. So you could just have a couple of your scales have this little kind of stripe on them like that. Sometimes I'll do the stripe and I'll color in a few of the scales. And it really adds a lot of visual interest to the tail or the creature that you're working on to kind of give them some variety and some texture. Some general silhouette things to keep in mind. So when I have like a baby character, like if I have like a cute little mermacorn that's off in the sea and it's just a little baby, it's so cute with its like sweet little face, and it's got just this cute little body and little legs, and its little tail is swishing around. I'll often give creatures like this bigger scales. And the reason why I do that is because you're telling a story with proportion. So everything that you are trying to hint with every element in this little drawing I'm doing, I want to hint that this creature is small. But because this character is just kind of floating in space, there's nothing else to indicate the size in the picture, because there isn't something that we know what the size is. So like when you see a painting or a photograph of someone standing next to a tree, that can kind of give you a hint on if they're short or tall, because we know in general how big trees tend to be. So when we see someone or something next to a tree, that gives us a frame of reference of how big or small it is. Well, when you have a creature that's just kind of floating around, you have no reference. So by giving them big scales, we know how big a scale is. A scale is really small. So if we see that the scale looks big on the creature, that tells us that the creature is actually small, because we are close enough to it to be able to see these really big scales. Now, if you're drawing like a big, let's see, like a merble, I'll show you my really quick. Why does that look like a cow? Not a cow, or a pig. My merble looks like a pig. All right, here we go. We've got a merble now. And I'm actually going to show you a merble I drew later on when I show you the finished examples. We're going to give this one very small scales. I would actually go smaller if I could, but I would give a creature like this really small scales for the same reason. I want to show that this creature is very big. So, because we know how big a scale is, we can reference the scale and know this merble is big because the scales look so small. So we're far away from the scales and they are like small compared to what is next to it, what they're on. So that automatically in our mind tells us that the creature itself is rather large. Another thing you can kind of play around with besides the size is the tightness of the scales. What do I mean by that? Another thing you can play with is the tightness of the scales. And what I mean by that is like how close together they are. So when we're doing like a cute kind of baby creature, I'll make sure that they're kind of spaced out a little bit more. And what I mean by that is I might give them a little bit of a shadow underneath all of the scales. I make the lines more defined like this. See how they're more like a bold line. But when I'm trying to do a more mature creature, or maybe like a more scary creature, or have the creature be more subtle, I'll kind of let the texture fade off a little bit more. So see how like the lines aren't so tight and complete? And the reason why I do that sometimes is because I want the scales to look more subtle, because sometimes when you look at fish, the scales blend together so tightly that it's really difficult to see the individual scales. So having something like this will help you kind of convey that sort of feeling. All right, now I can show you some finished examples of some artwork that I've done that will show all of the different kinds of ways you can utilize these scales. This one is actually kind of based off my niece Molly. My brother Peter was here earlier. This is she as a mermaid. So this is one of my Capricorns. And for this one, I kind of went with a more subtle treatment of the scales. See how I left the line art just in like that light blue color? And I did that because I wanted the focus to be more on the character's face. And I didn't want the texture of the scales to be too distracting from the overall character. This is an example of a more kind of tattered, spooky kind of treatment of scales. So with this one, I really played with the shapes and I elongated them, and I also I kind of tiled them differently than I normally would. So I wanted this character to feel kind of heavy, and the way that I achieved that was by giving them this kind of overlap here. You can see that the scales look like they are just kind of like laying on top of each other, as if they're more kind of rounded individually. And what that does is it kind of makes it look like they're like really like solid forms on top of one another, and gives it this kind of interesting effect where it almost reminds me of just like coins stacked on top of each other, and it just makes the character feel more heavy and adds like a little bit of visual variety to this very sad and lost mermaid who is trying to check on her makeup, but she can't because she's wearing this giant helmet. And why is the world so wrong and terrible? So I kind of went with a more subtle treatment of the scales because I really wanted this creature to not look cute. Well, like, you know, have appeal, and look like nice to look at, but not be like a cutesy kind of adorable character. So I gave them these really kind of tightly packed small scales to not only hint that the creature is larger than the average goat might be, but also just to kind of create a more subtle, more kind of understated texture to the creature so that it doesn't come off as too like cute and bubbly, especially when you're using round shapes. Whenever you're using round shapes with evil characters, you want to handle those delicately. There's a lot of round shapes already here, but I feel like the color and mood and contrast of the character kind of carries the evilness for them. Now this character, we definitely wanted this one to look as cute as possible. Oh my god. Look at this wee merlion here. This little merlion is all about being cute and adorable, just like little cats are. So how did I help tell that story with my choice of scales? Well, you'll notice that the scales on this one are very big compared to some of the other creatures we saw. And that is, once again, to help signify to the viewer by using size relation that this character is small. I also very clearly defined all the scales, and I paid a little bit more attention here to making sure that they looked clean and shiny and new. And that's because this character is a baby. They haven't gone through the strife of life yet. So it makes more sense that their tail and their scales would be more uniform and more clean and more tidy, and not like sloppy fast scales. So this is a really good example of how you can use those scales to make your character look very cute and adorable. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you enjoyed all of the art and all of the tutorial goodness, and that you are ready to take over the world and draw many scales. Don't forget, take out your sketchbooks and just draw scale after scale after scale after scale. And I believe that you will master scales in no time. It just takes practice like anything else. Thanks guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to my channel so that YouTube knows that I alone am making the best unicorn content. Don't forget to ring that bell and turn on notifications so that you'll get a notification when I have a new video to see. I forgot to take away the meet and greet sign. I will take care of that in a minute. Is all this making sense? Is the chat following along? Nobody said anything for a while now, so either you're mesmerized by this magic or something's wrong here. We are back with more art and story time with your girl, Heather R. Hitchman. Let me make sure that we are actually live.